Welcome back, everybody. In this final section, we talk about water use and scarcity. What happens when there's not enough water? Now, really quickly before we begin. In my opinion, the job of science and of the science educator is to inform, not to persuade. You give people things that are known to be true, good information, ways of thinking about the world, and the persuasion you leave to other people. They can make decisions and come to conclusions for themselves. This particular section is impossible for me to talk about without there being some persuasion and things that reflect my own personal point of view. Be warned. So, to start out, we have to ask the question, what is the problem we're trying to solve here? And it is a story of competing water uses. So we have this breakdown by different sectors of a scarce resource, water. Most of it worldwide is going to be used in agriculture, some in industry, manufacturing, processing, and domestic use about 10%, going to be individual use, personal drinking water. Lower and middle income countries, vast majority, even more than worldwide, is going to be agriculture. The share used by industry shrinks. It makes sense because these countries are less developed. Domestic is about the same. For the higher income countries, including places like the United States, vast majority, comparatively, is going to be used by industry, some agriculture, about a third, and comparatively more domestic use. Now, what might happen when there is not enough water to go around, right? We have competing water uses between different sectors and parts of society. So there's a location called the Aral Sea. You can see it here. It's a huge body of water. At one point, it was the world's fourth largest lake between Kazakhstan in the north and Uzbekistan in the south, former countries of the Soviet Union. And it was used by the Soviets for water for their agriculture. And because this body of water does not replenish very quickly over time, the Soviets used basically the entire thing, 90+% of it, for water for growing food. And the long-term costs, right, no more shipping, can't put a port on here, can't use it for drinking water or individual consumption, can't fish here, and actually the climate of the surrounding areas is made more extreme by the water not being here. There are all of these long-term costs. And the point is not to point and laugh and say, they screwed up, never do that. The point is to learn the lessons of these people and to keep in mind the balance between short-term benefits and long-term trade-offs, as we see in so many other areas. So I've included these images just to show what the lake looks like now. And okay, on the one hand, you can say, yes, with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been, much better for us to preserve the lake, and it would have been better in the long term, except that no hindsight was really necessary here, right? The water didn't go down all at once. It would have been bit by bit. It would have been known that it was not replenishing at the time, and yet decision was made by policymakers to use it anyway. In other words, no hindsight was necessary. The people at the time knew that what they were doing had these long-term costs associated, and they didn't care. So let's zoom out a little bit and talk about water use globally, or water scarcity globally. So about 4 billion people, about 2/3 of the world's population, experiences some degree of severe water scarcity at least 1 month out of the year. And, well, how do you define severe water scarcity? It means the demand for water is more than 100% of the available water in the region. And more than 2 billion people live in entire countries where the water supply is inadequate. Okay, now, these first two, these are verifiable, these are established, you can put this into the knowledge bucket. The next ones are projections, but they are useful projections about the future, done by people who know this topic well. So as it stands, nearly half the world's population could be living in some degree of water scarcity by 2025. Some 700 million people stand to be displaced by intense water scarcity by 2030. Something like this can lead to refugee crises that affect the countries around whoever is running out of water, not just the one country. It becomes a global geopolitical issue. And by 2040, again, according to UN projections, about 1 in 4 children worldwide will be living in areas of extremely high water stress. So I've included this map to illustrate graphically the information from the last slide. So we have these different colors. Green is best. The dark red here is the worst, are number of months out of the year in which water scarcity is more than 100%. Now, more than 100%, that doesn't mean that, 100% of the people don't have water. What this means is that the amount of demand for water, the amount of water needed, is more than the amount of water available for however many months out of the year. And you can see this applies to various places in the United States. Well, the people there don't go thirsty, but they do have water restrictions. They have limits on the amount of water use. That is what this means. And as an aside here, if you are thinking about places that you would want to live in the future, I would definitely recommend choosing somewhere that's green to yellow to bright orange here. Okay, now what about the United States specifically? Well, this is not everywhere in the country that is experiencing a drought, but it is the region where you have the most severe droughts, right over here in the west and in the southwest, and even a couple northwest states. And we have our scale here, right? White is no drought at all, to all the way up to D3 and D4. Very severe droughts here. If you want to know exactly what this scale means and how these are determined, you can check out these links here. But the point is that drought has become a common thing, so common that it's not even everyday news out in this part of the United States, reflecting a deep water scarcity and a need to improve our use of water resources. Now, whenever I cover this, there is this question that is always asked, right? Are we going to run out of water? And the answer to this largely is no. For as long as you live in the United States and the world does not completely turn itself on its head and flip upside down, there will still be water available for people to drink, water available for people to use. But as water gets more scarce, there are many, many negative consequences, economic and personally. Okay, now hopefully so far I've been able to convey to you that there is a problem, that the problem is large, that it is widespread, that there is history to the problem, and that it is likely to exist in the future. But why should you care? Behavior is about incentives. What would make somebody want to change this? Well, the first thing to care about would be droughts, right? Droughts can harm even communities that are relatively safe, ones that are stable, ones that are even relatively well off. And a drought doesn't have to cause a complete collapse with the sky falling and people dying of thirst and everything becoming a catastrophe to hurt the community, right? Population and economy are growing, especially here in Arizona, but the amount of water stays constant, and this can create a problem if the water resource systems do not become more efficient and more conservative over time. Water does eventually return to Earth through the water cycle. It's not like water that is used is lost completely, but it can come back in a different form, in a different area. It's not as predictable. And the bottom line here, conserving water, improving the efficiency of a water resource system can prevent disasters that would hurt everybody. Second point, there are economic and potentially big political and geopolitical costs to water scarcity, right? As water gets more scarce, it gets more expensive. This can slow down the economy in many sectors, right? Manufacturing, agricultural. And if you have an area where water is incredibly scarce, you can displace hundreds of thousands of millions of people as a result. This becomes a refugee crisis, potentially, which can affect other countries and turn into something really, really nasty. The bottom line here, there are all sorts of conflicts and slowdowns economically over water, which are unnecessary, which are preventable with the knowledge and the foresight that we have now. We just have to do something about it. And the final piece of it, the part that is maybe the most personal, I would want to live in an area where there is abundant water. I like things like lakes, water features, things like fountains. And the more scarce water becomes, the less of those things, the beautiful things that we all have to enjoy. There's also the more practical note, right? Firefighters, hospitals, gas stations, street cleaners, health clubs, gyms, and restaurants, right? Things that we like or that we need all need a lot of water to provide their services to the community. If water becomes scarce, it becomes more expensive for them to do business or provide their service, and as a result, everybody pays. The bottom line here, water is a shared resource, so it's not really an option to not care what somebody else does with it. For the final question here, moving things a little closer to home, you ask the question, well, how does this affect you directly? So we look at Arizona here. And in Arizona, we have access to two Great Lakes. Not like, Great Lakes, but pretty awesome lakes. How about that, right? We have Lake Mead and Lake Powell. And, well, how are these lakes doing? And the answer is not well. Lakes are not doing very well at all. Now, these are lakes which are shared with other places. Colorado River is shared not only with other states, but also with the other country of Mexico, which uses its water. And as it stands, the amount of water stress has increased on these dramatically. Right? Lake Powell down about 50 feet, Lake Mead down about 20 feet. And actually, as a result of this drought, there's actually a plan in the Arizona legislature, not been passed, not a sure thing, just a proposal, to pump Mississippi River water to the Colorado River to help with this drought. My opinion on this one, is like asking the question with finance, right? Which is easier, raising income by doing this or cutting costs? Okay, we have made it to the end. Those of you who stuck around this far, thank you. You should congratulate yourself for sticking it out. First, groundwater, generally. What are the systems? How do they work? What are the terms involved? Subsidence. How does it happen? Where does it happen? Karst and cave systems. How do they form? Dissolution. What is the process? What is the story of how these regions come to be? Finally, global freshwater use and the scarcity associated with it. That is all I have for you. Thank you.